if we look in a web search where our terms are MinGeo WMS image server, up comes at the top this geospatial image service. This is a cloud-based or online service that allows us to access aerial images, satellite and air photos, from a relatively long time period. If I look at the technical specs here, it lists the request URL. This is what I need to find these data online. So if I copy that, I highlight it and then copy it, I can use that in QGIS to add, here in our Add Layers button, a WMS, WMTS service. So I want to create a new one, and I have to give it a name, and I'll just call this the MinGeo Images. And I'll paste the URL I just copied and say OK. Then if I connect to that service, I see I get a list here of images that are available to me. So there's regional images, there's Twin Cities images, and there's statewide images, 198 in this case. I'm going to go down here and just get the FSA 2015 full color images, and I'm going to use this contrast stretch between two standard deviations. So if I indicate that those are the ones I want by selecting them and add them, I'll see that if I go back to my main pane here, it shows up as this sort of mosaic blurry image. And as I zoom in, I can see that I have image data here for the entire state. Now these image data are collected on a county by county basis, and they're stitched together. So sometimes at the edges of counties you'll get the changes that are associated in both the time of year and the illumination conditions of the day. But if I want this as a background, or if I want this just as a source of information to digitize from, so suppose I'm creating a new data layer here and I'm trying to digitize roads or update roads, I can get those data from these images. I've zoomed to a different part of the state, in the agricultural south, to demonstrate rudiments of data creation and digitizing. We're going to create a new layer here. So up near our Add a Data Layer, we can actually create a new data layer. It's this little dot line. Now it's a vector data layer. If I left click on that set of segmented lines joined together, I get a window that asks me the name of the new shapefile layer and other characteristics. So if I left click and navigate to a location, in this case a directory in which I want to store my data, I can name my new data set, and I'll call this first points because it's going to be a point data layer. There are other things I can define. I want to keep it a system type. We could include the z-dimension, I'm not. And then a coordinate system. Now for now I'll go with this default. It's adopting the coordinate system from the background image that's already been shown or displayed, and so I'll go ahead and stay with that coordinate system. I could add new fields. So for example, I can add an ID field, and I could make that field a whole number or a decimal number, and I can give it a length and a precision since it's a decimal number. I could then add another field, another new field, so I could call this the name and make it text, right? And so I can add these to the list and populate these either while I'm digitizing or after the fact. So if I say OK, then I have a new data layer here added. I can then digitize into that data layer by toggling the editing on. So I hit this edit button here for the first points, toggle it on, or I can toggle it off when I'm done editing. When I toggle it on, you notice that other options here in the editing bar become active. If I toggle it off, then they become inactive, they get grayed out. So as I toggle it on, I can save edits or cancel edits for the selected layers. I can add points or I can modify points. So here if I click on this, this is to add new points for point features. And then I can modify points here, so I can move things around. I'm just going to digitize buildings, let's say, in points for buildings. And this is going to be an example. It's not going to be exhaustive. So if I zoom in the data layer, I can see then that there are buildings here most of them surrounded by trees in this part of the country. So I can zoom into when I can see buildings, and then I can click and add values. So I can give this an ID of 1 and a name of a building. Okay, right, and it puts a point there, and the same thing again, ID of 2 and another building. I could, if I were interpreting as I went along, change the value here. So this could be a barn, and I could have a set of characteristics. So you see here I'm adding features by locating over them and giving values to the attributes as I go along. I can pan and zoom either using the tools here on the top or in the keyboard if I have arrow buttons, so I can move around. I can zoom out, right? Zoom back to my last extent, use the hand to move over to another portion, and then go back to digitizing. So here I'm adding as I go along. Now, I don't have to enter data. I can just leave them null and enter them later, right? So I'm not typing anything in for some of them. So you can see then that I have been creating points. If I want, I can zoom to the extent of those points, right? And it shows the points that I've digitized so far. And as I add more points further out, that extent will increase. So I can go ahead and just quickly, now these are not very well placed. I'm just doing this to show you, oh, I'm expanding the extent here. And then if I zoom to the extent of this layer, right, zoom in, zoom out, I now have then points over a very broad area. And if I zoom in, I can go back and expand to the extent, zoom to layer, and it fits them all inside my window. So when I have points that I'm happy with, I can go ahead and save them. Right? So for the current edits, I can save for the selected layer. So it now is writing these points into the file. I can also go and modify these points. So I can turn on the Vertex tool and grab a point and move it. So I'll grab a point and move it. If I were to find that there was a point that wasn't exactly on top of a building, so I'm editing here and I zoom in on this point and I find out it's not quite on top of a building. So I can go ahead and zoom in really close. And with the vertex editing on, grab the point and move it over to the top of a building. So I can edit these points as I go along. Again, save for the selected layers and then toggle the editing off when I'm done editing. And now I have this first point layer. If I right click on it and look at its table, I've added some features with their IDs, and then other features I've left the IDs blank, they're null. So I can enter the data while I'm digitizing, and that's a little bit slower during the digitizing process. But I come back after the fact and enter the attribute data afterwards. I can also create other kinds of shapefiles. So if I go back to my Create a Shapefile button and left click, I can create one called First Lines and make this, instead of a point data type, geometry type, I'll make it a line geometry type. Keep all the other defaults, including the coordinate system, and say OK. And I have now a first lines data layer. Again, I can toggle that on. It's selected here. You notice it gets toggled on for editing. And I have an add line feature button. So if I click on that, I can then position my cursor over line features and digitize the line features. Now when I'm done, I can do a right click, so I'm doing a series of left clicks to do the vertices, and then right click and give it an ID and say OK, and then I have a line feature. Now that isn't very visible, so I want to maybe change the properties of this. I can go and make this in the properties wider and maybe a more vibrant or visible color. and I apply that and say OK, and now I can see the line that I digitized. So I simply just start at a current line and digitize along linear features I want to record in my data set. Now I can zoom in or zoom out while I'm digitizing. So if I go up here and zoom in and zoom out, and then when I go back and pick the the digitize feature button, it reattaches it there to the end of the line. Again, when I'm done, then I can just right-click and give it the ID. Now, sometimes when you're digitizing, as we see here, we've messed up. We either don't have enough vertices or the vertices in the wrong place, and so we might want to go fix that. So I have an edit tool here where I can, in the Vertex tool, change the locations or add new vertices. You notice that when this tool is activated, if I hover over my line feature, the existing vertices show up. And so if I click over one, I can drag it, right? So I'll click and drag to position. I can reposition then my line that way by grabbing these and moving them into place, right? So I'm grabbing and repositioning. If I want to add a new vertex in the middle, I can click on the middle and drag to a location, and then a new vertex shows up. So I can densify my digitizing here and move points around to improve my digitizing while I'm creating lines. So I can, when I'm done, save for the selected features, zoom in and zoom out and add as many features as I want, and then when I'm done digitizing, toggle the digitizing off. Now, if I go and look in my data repository or in my folder, the first lines and the first points have been added. You notice that these shapefiles contain many different files. There's an SHP, a QPJ, a PRG, and a DBF. These are all required. If I want to copy my data someplace else, I have to bring all the first lines files over together. Although when I'm displaying, I hone in on the .shp, it's useless without all this other information. So I've created two new data sets here. Now I can, just for completeness, show you how to create a new Polygon data set. And in the same way, I'll call it first polys. I'll keep it all the defaults, except I'll go to a Polygon data set and I'll say OK, and again it gets added, and I can go ahead and toggle it for digitizing, and I get slightly different tools here, but I want to add a Polygon feature, and again digitizing with the series of left clicks around a Polygon feature, and then I have it completed here. I can give it an ID, so I right click and give it my Polygon ID. Let's do another polygon here, a fairly simple, straightforward one. And so now I have data in my polygons. I can save these for the selected features. And again, there's vertex editing, just like with lines. And so I can go and grab and move vertices if I want. Same thing here, right? Another thing I can do is I can undo a change if I didn't like something that I did. So I can grab and move something, right? And if I made a mistake, I undo it and it goes back to where it was. Again, save, toggle editing off, and I have new layers. So that's a quick intro into how to digitize. Now there's other advanced digitizing and editing tools, but I just wanted to get you started in digitizing.